Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, when we pick out these materials for our deep dives, sometimes we get stories that are strange. Some that are sad and some that are downright scary.
Yeah.
Today's story is all three.
Oh, yeah.
It's about the Briley Brothers and their reign of terror in Richmond, Virginia, back in the 1970s.
Yeah.
You sent in some excerpts from a PDF detailing their crimes, and let me tell you, it's a wild ride
Uh-huh.
through one of the most unsettling crime sprees in American history.
What's fascinating about this case is how it really challenges our assumptions about criminality.
Yeah.
The Briley brothers weren't, hardened criminals from some broken home.
Right.
On the surface, they were seemingly normal young men,
Right.
but they had a secret, a surprising secret, a love for all things creepy and crawly.
Yeah, the source material mentions that they were known for having exotic pets.
Oh, wow.
I'm talking piranhas, tarantulas, even boa constrictors.
Yeah.
It's definitely not your typical suburban household pet situation. Do you think this fascination with the macabre hints at a darker side?
It's certainly an intriguing piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Some experts believe that a fascination with dangerous animals could indicate a desensitization to violence, a lack of empathy that might make it easier to cross certain lines.
Yeah.
Of course, this is just speculation, but it's a detail that raises interesting questions about their psychological development.
And speaking of crossing lines, their seemingly normal facade was shattered when Linwood, the oldest brother, committed his first murder at just 16 years old. He shot and killed a neighbor, Orline Christian, as she was hanging laundry in her backyard.
What's particularly striking about this first murder is that he almost got away with it.
Really?
It was only because her relatives noticed a mark on her body at the funeral home and requested a closer examination that the bullet wound was discovered.
Oh, wow. That's a chilling detail.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what might have happened if that bullet wound had gone unnoticed. Would the Briley brothers' reign of terror have even begun?
That's a question we can only speculate on.
Right.
But what we do know is that Linwood's sentence for this crime was relatively light.
Yeah.
A year in reform school. Some criminologists argue that this leniency might have contributed to his later escalation of violence.
Yeah.
It raises questions about the effectiveness of the juvenile justice system at the time and whether a different approach could have potentially altered the course of events.
It's a disturbing thought, for sure. And unfortunately, this early act of violence was just a precursor to the horrors that would unfold a few years later.
In 1979, the Briley brothers, along with an accomplice named Duncan Meekins, embarked on a 7-month rampage that left Richmond gripped by fear.
Wow.
Their crimes were shockingly random and brutal, targeting victims from all walks of life.
Yeah, the source material lays out this timeline, and it's just one horrifying incident after another.
Yeah.
They didn't discriminate. A vending machine serviceman, a 76-year-old babysitter, a disc jockey. It seemed like anyone could become a next target.
The randomness of the victims was one of the most terrifying aspects of their crimes.
Yeah.
It created a climate of fear where no one felt safe.
Right.
It's important to remember that this wasn't just a statistic. These were real people, families and loved ones whose lives were tragically cut short.
The source mentions some particularly gruesome details, like the murder of 17-year-old Christopher Phillips. They suspected him of messing with Linwood's car and ended up dropping a cinder block on his head.
It's a brutal example of their callous disregard for human life.
Yeah.
Their methods were often shockingly violent, suggesting a level of rage and cruelty that's hard to comprehend.
And then there's the case of William and Virginia Butcher. They were attacked in their own home, tied up, robbed, and then the brothers doused their house with kerosene and set it on fire.
It's almost unbelievable that they managed to escape.
Yeah.
They're the only known survivors of the Briley brothers' attacks.
Wow.
A testament to their incredible will to survive.
Right.
But even though they escaped with their lives, the trauma of that experience undoubtedly left a lasting impact.
Absolutely. The source material details their harrowing escape, and it's a miracle they made it out alive.
Yeah.
It really brings home the sheer terror the Briley brothers inflicted on their victims.
Right.
But as awful as all of this is, there's one set of murders that stands out as particularly disturbing, even in this already horrific story.
You're referring to the Wilkerson family, right?
Yeah.
This was their final and arguably most chilling crime.
This one hits differently because Harvey Wilkerson, the father, was a longtime friend of the Braleys.
Right.
It adds this whole other layer of betrayal to an already horrifying situation.
The fact that they could so easily betray someone they knew, someone who trusted them, speaks volumes about their complete lack of empathy and remorse.
And the details are just brutal.
Yeah.
They assaulted and raped his pregnant wife, Judy Barton, and then in front of her they made their accomplice, Duncan Meekins, execute Harvey Wilkerson.
This act, forcing Meekins to participate in the murder, speaks to their manipulative and controlling nature.
Yeah.
They weren't just content with taking lives, they wanted to break others.
Right.
To drag them into their world of violence.
And if that wasn't enough, they then murdered Judy Barton and her 5-year-old son, Harvey Wayne Barton. It's just unimaginable cruelty.
The Wilkerson family murders really demonstrate the depths of depravity the Briley brothers were capable of.
Yeah.
It was a crime that shook Richmond to its core and cemented their legacy as some of the most ruthless killers in the city's history.
It's a good thing the Reign of Terror came to an end soon after that.
Yes. Thankfully, their spree ended with their capture, which was almost accidental. The police happened to be in the area of the Wilkerson home as the Briley brothers were fleeing the scene. This seemingly random stroke of luck led to their arrest and the unraveling of their horrific crimes.
What happened after their arrest?
Well, during their interrogation, Duncan Meekins, hoping to avoid the death penalty, agreed to a plea deal.
Yeah.
His testimony revealed the full extent of the Briley brothers' crimes, providing crucial evidence that led to their convictions.
So even though they were finally caught, the legal process wasn't straightforward.
That's right. Virginia law at the time distinguished between being the triggerman in a murder and being an accomplice. This distinction had a major impact on sentencing. Since Anthony, the youngest Briley brother, couldn't be definitively proven to have personally killed anyone, he avoided the death penalty.
Wow. So even though he was involved in these horrific crimes, this legal technicality spared him from the most severe punishment.
Yes. He ended up receiving a life sentence plus 119 years, while Linwood and James Briley, being the primary perpetrators, were both sentenced to death. But even behind bars, their story was far from over.
Wait, you're saying they tried to escape from death row?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
In 1984, Linwood and James Briley, along with 4 other inmates, managed to break out of Mecklenburg Correctional Center in a daring and carefully planned escape.
Hold on. They escaped from death row. That's straight out of a movie.
It was a remarkable feat, demonstrating their intelligence and resourcefulness.
Yeah.
They almost pulled it off, making it all the way to Vermont before being recaptured.
Wow.
Their escape sent shockwaves through the state and reignited the fear that had gripped Richmond years earlier.
How in the world did they catch them?
Ironically, their downfall came through a family connection. The authorities had wiretapped their uncle's phone, and it was through those intercepted conversations that they were able to track the escapees down and bring them back into custody.
Wow, so even after escaping death row, their crimes were ultimately their undoing. What happened to their accomplices in the escape?
Their fates varied. Some were also sentenced to death and executed while others remain incarcerated to this day. The escape attempt added another layer of complexity to an already tangled web of legal proceedings and moral dilemmas.
So despite their escape, Linwood and James eventually faced their executions.
Yes, their appeals eventually ran out. Linwood was executed in the electric chair in 1984, maintaining his innocence until the very end.
Now what about James?
James Briley was executed a year later in 1985. His last words, spoken directly to the witnesses, were simply, "Are you happy?" It's a chilling and ambiguous statement that continues to haunt those who were present that day.
What do you think he meant by that? Was it remorse, defiance, or something else entirely?
It's a question that has been debated for decades.
Yeah.
Some believe it was a final act of manipulation,
Right.
an attempt to instill guilt in those who supported his execution.
Right.
Others see it as a cry of despair, a recognition of the tragic path he had chosen.
It's definitely a haunting note to end on. So that's the end of the Briley brothers, right? Case closed.
Not quite. Remember, their younger brother, Anthony Briley, was spared the death penalty and is still serving his life sentence. And then there's Duncan Meekins, the accomplice who turned state's evidence.
Right.
His role in the case raises a lot of complex questions about the criminal justice system and the possibility of redemption.
It sounds like even though Linwood and James Briley are gone, their story is far from over. There's still a lot to unpack, especially concerning the aftermath of their crimes and the lasting impact they had in Richmond.
You're absolutely right. In Part 2, we'll delve deeper into the stories of those left behind, the families of the victims, the community of Richmond, and even those involved in the crimes themselves. It's a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil, the complexities of justice, and the enduring power of the human spirit.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the unsettling world of the Briley Brothers. We just finished talking about their chilling crime spree and eventual capture, but there's so much more to uncover. This case isn't just about the crimes themselves, but about the ripple effects of their actions, the questions of justice, and the possibility of redemption.
You're right. We left off with Linwood and James Briley facing execution, but their younger brother, Anthony, who was also convicted of murder, received a life sentence.
Right.
And then there's Duncan Meekins, their accomplice, who turned state's evidence.
What happened to them in the aftermath of all of this?
Well, their stories highlight the complexities of the criminal justice system and the sometimes conflicting goals of punishment and rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Anthony Briley, despite his involvement in 4 murders, wasn't proven to be the actual killer in any of them. This distinction spared him from the death penalty under Virginia law at the time.
The source mentions he's serving a life sentence plus 119 years. That's a long time, but it also means there's a possibility of parole.
Right.
Has he ever come up for parole?
He has, and so has Duncan Meekins. They've both been repeatedly denied parole despite some compelling arguments in their favor.
What kind of arguments?
It's actually quite fascinating.
Yeah.
The source material points out that even Robert J. Rice and Warren von Schuch, the very prosecutors who put the Briley brothers behind bars, have advocated for both Anthony Briley and Meekins' release.
Really?
They believe that both men have served sufficient time and no longer pose a threat to society.
Wow, the prosecutors who originally convicted them are now supporting their release. That's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah.
What's the reasoning behind their change of heart?
It speaks to the idea that rehabilitation can occur within the prison system.
Yeah.
These prosecutors who witnessed firsthand the depths of the Briley brothers' depravity are now convinced that both Anthony Briley and Meekins have genuinely changed during their time behind bars.
It definitely makes you question the purpose of punishment.
Mm-hmm.
Is it simply about retribution?
Right.
Or is there a possibility for redemption, even for those who've committed horrific crimes?
It's a debate that has raged for centuries and one that lies at the heart of this case.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have the victims and their families who are seeking justice and closure.
Right.
The pain and loss they've endured is unimaginable.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have individuals who, despite their past actions, may have transformed during their incarceration and could potentially contribute positively to society if given the chance.
It's a tough call for sure. And the fact that this debate is even happening shows the nuances of this case. It's not just a black and white story of pure good versus pure evil.
Right.
There are shades of gray, and those shades are often difficult to decipher.
Exactly. And beyond the legal ramifications, we have to consider the wider impact of these crimes on Richmond.
Yeah.
The Briley brothers' reign of terror left an undeniable scar on the community.
The source material describes the atmosphere in Richmond during that time as a living nightmare. People were terrified to leave their homes, distrustful of strangers, and constantly on edge. Can you imagine living under that kind of fear and paranoia?
It's hard to fathom.
Yeah.
The Briley brothers' random acts of violence shattered the community's sense of safety and security.
Right.
They exploited the very foundations of trust that hold a society together.
And those wounds don't just magically disappear once the perpetrators are caught. The psychological and emotional scars can linger for years, even decades.
Absolutely. The source doesn't go into detail about the community's response, but it mentions that the Briley brothers' escape from death row in 1984 reignited those fears, reminding everyone of the chaos and terror they had inflicted. It was a painful reminder that even behind bars, their power to disrupt and traumatize hadn't entirely vanished.
It makes you wonder how a community recovers from something like this. How do you rebuild trust, find a sense of normalcy, and move forward after such a traumatic experience?
It's a long and difficult process that requires resilience, compassion, and a collective effort to heal. There's no quick fix, no easy answer.
Wait.
It's about acknowledging the pain, supporting those who are struggling, and working together to create a safer and more secure future.
It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit that communities are able to find a way forward after enduring such darkness. But the healing process can't truly begin without understanding the root causes of this kind of violence.
You're absolutely right. We've explored the timeline of the crimes, the legal aftermath, the impact on the community. But to truly grapple with this case, we need to try to understand the factors that might have contributed to the Briley brothers' descent into violence.
Earlier, we talked about their unusual fascination with dangerous pets. Do you think that's just a coincidence?
Yeah.
Or could it be a sign of something deeper?
It's definitely a detail that warrants further exploration. While it's important not to oversimplify or jump to conclusions, some psychologists believe that a fascination with violence, even in a seemingly harmless form like exotic pets, can be an indicator of underlying psychological
Like
issues.
what kind of issues?
Well, for example, it could suggest a lack of empathy,
Mm,
a detachment from the suffering of others.
right.
It's possible that for the Briley brothers, this early exposure to violence, even in the context of animals, desensitized them to the consequences of their actions.
It's like they blurred the lines between what's acceptable and what's not, between predator and prey.
That's a powerful way to put it. And if we look at their childhood, we see other potential red flags. The source mentions that their parents separated when they were young and that their mother was the primary disciplinarian, the only one they seem to truly respect.
Right.
Could a lack of positive male role models have played a role in their development?
It's certainly a theory worth considering. Studies have shown that a stable and supportive family environment can be a protective factor against delinquency and criminal behavior. Without that foundation, young people are more vulnerable to negative influences and more likely to engage in risky or destructive activities.
And let's not forget that Linwood committed his first murder at the age of 16. That early act of violence and the seemingly lenient punishment he received could have been a turning point.
Right.
It's possible that a more robust intervention at that critical juncture might have altered his trajectory and prevented the horrors that followed.
It's a chilling thought, but it highlights the importance of early intervention programs and a juvenile justice system that takes youth crime seriously, not just as a youthful indiscretion, but as a potential sign of something more serious.
The Briley brothers case is a tragic example of how a series of missed opportunities, from their upbringing to their early encounters with the legal system, might have contributed to their eventual path of destruction.
It's like a domino effect, one event leading to another, culminating in a horrific cascade of violence. But even if we can understand the factors that contributed to their actions, it doesn't excuse their crimes.
Of course not. Understanding the why behind their actions is not about absolving them of responsibility. It's about trying to learn from their mistakes, to identify potential warning signs, and to develop strategies to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the perpetrators, the legal proceedings, and the broader societal impact. But in the end, this story is really about the victims, those whose lives were tragically cut short by the Briley brothers' senseless acts of violence.
You're absolutely right. It's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism of the case, but we can't forget the human cost. These weren't just names on a police report, but real people with families, dreams, and aspirations.
In Part 3, we'll shift our focus to the victims, their stories, and the lasting impact of the Briley brothers' crimes on their families and loved ones. It's a crucial perspective, one that reminds us that behind every headline, every chilling detail, there are real people whose lives were irrevocably altered by violence. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
It's been a heavy conversation so far, exploring the dark world of the Briley brothers and the shocking acts they committed. But in this final part, I want to shift our focus to the individuals whose lives were tragically intertwined with their crimes, the victims.
Yeah, it's crucial to remember that each victim was more than just a name in a news report or a statistic in a crime database. They were real people with hopes, dreams, and loved ones who were left to grapple with the unimaginable pain of their loss.
The source material we're working with lists all the victims, but it can be easy to lose sight of the human element when we're talking about these kinds of cases.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to personalize these stories, to understand that behind every name there was a life lived, a family impacted, a community forever changed.
Let's start with Linwood Briley's first victim, Orline Christian. The source mentions she was 57 years old, a neighbor who was simply hanging laundry in her backyard when Linwood shot and killed her from his bedroom window.
It's a stark reminder of the random and senseless nature of their violence. She was just going about her daily routine, and in an instant, her life was taken. It's a tragedy that ripples outwards, impacting not only her immediate family, but also her friends, neighbors, and the entire community.
It's heartbreaking to think about the ripple effect of that single act, and as we talked about earlier, her murder almost went unnoticed.
Right.
It was only because her family noticed a mark on her body at the funeral home that they discovered the bullet wound.
Can you imagine the added pain and trauma of not knowing how your loved one died?
Right. The uncertainty, the lingering questions, those things can make the grieving process even more difficult.
Absolutely. And then we have the case of William and Virginia Butcher, the only known survivors of the Briley brothers' attacks. The source details their terrifying ordeal of being tied up, robbed, and left to die in their burning home. It's a miracle they managed to escape.
Their story is both incredible and deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
They survived, but the physical and emotional scars of that experience undoubtedly lingered long after the flames were extinguished.
The source doesn't delve into their lives post-attack, but I can only imagine the strength and resilience it took to rebuild their lives after such a horrific trauma. They faced a challenge that most of us can't even fathom.
And it's a stark reminder that while we often focus on the victims who lost their lives, the survivors of violent crimes also bear a heavy burden. Their lives are forever altered, and they deserve our compassion and support. Each victim has a story, and each story is a poignant reminder of the devastating impact of the Briley Brothers' crimes. There was Michael McDuffie, a vending machine serviceman attacked in his own home; Mary Gallen, a 76-year-old babysitter who was followed, brutally beaten, and murdered.
John Gallagher, a talented disc jockey, was abducted after a performance and shot in cold blood. His family endured the agonizing wait for his body to be recovered from the James River. It's hard to comprehend the anguish and uncertainty they must have faced during that time.
And of course, we can't forget the Wilkerson family. Their murders were particularly brutal, marked by betrayal and a level of cruelty that's difficult to comprehend.
Judy Barton, 8 months pregnant, was raped and killed. Her 5-year-old son, Harvey, was executed in front of her. And Harvey Wilkerson, a friend of the Briley brothers, was betrayed and shot in the head. Their story highlights the depths of depravity that the Briley brothers were capable of.
The sense of betrayal in that case is just staggering. The fact that Harvey Wilkerson considered the Briley's friends makes their actions even more horrific.
It speaks to their complete disregard for human life, their ability to compartmentalize their actions and exploit the trust of those around them.
The impact on the victims' families is immeasurable. The grief, the anger, the unanswered questions, these are burdens they carry with them every day. And their pain is rekindled every time Anthony Brinley or Duncan Meekins comes up for parole.
You're right. For the families, the Briley brothers case isn't just a historical event.
Right.
It's an open wound that is constantly being reopened. The parole hearings force them to relive their trauma, to fight for justice for their loved ones, and to face the possibility that those responsible for their pain might one day walk free.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process, one that often extends far beyond the courtroom and the initial sentencing.
It's also a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Despite the unimaginable pain they have endured, these families continue to fight for accountability, to honor the memories of their loved ones, and to ensure that their stories are not forgotten.
The Briley brothers case is a chilling reminder of the capacity for evil that exists in the world. But it's also a story about the enduring power of the human spirit, about the importance of compassion and empathy, and about the need to learn from the past to prevent such tragedies from happening in the future.
We may never fully understand what drove the Briley brothers to commit such horrific acts, but by exploring their case in depth, by acknowledging the pain of the victims and their families, and by striving to learn from the past, we can work towards a world where such senseless violence becomes less and less frequent.
That's a powerful message to end on. To our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring this case, to delve deeper into the lives of the victims, and to honor their memories by remembering their names and sharing their stories. Their lives mattered, and their loss continues to be felt by those who knew and loved them. Until next time, keep diving deep, but always remember the human cost of these stories.